and our focus is on manufacturing. I'm being joined in the studio by the Group Managing Director of Dunlop Nigeria PLC, Mohammed Yunusa. I hope to be joined later on the program by Rasheed Adegbenro, the Acting Director General, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. But Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Nice to be here again.
Well, it's been a good year for some, and for some it's not been so rosy year, particularly for those in the manufacturing sector, which is where you apply your trade. A lot of them complained of harsh operating environment. Do you share the same view?
Well, harsh operating environment coming from principally power issues, coming from unfair competition, i.e. you have a lot of incoming products from other countries, and
that's substandard ones that they come to dump here.
Yes, and of course the tariff structure is also kind of more encouraging of imports than it is of locally made goods. So yes, to that extent, yeah.
But these were not challenges that we're not unfamiliar with. They're challenges that have always been there. So they were no different this year.
Yeah, they've always been there, but you see the threshold continues to shift.
Higher or lower?
You know, the longer this harshness continues, the more you get to a stage where you may not be able to sustain it again. You know, so what I need to say very quickly that the efforts that have been put in place right now by the current government shows that perhaps we may begin to tread a new future that will bring us back to an era where manufacturing will continue to be encouraged for the benefit of the entire economy.
Now, we know that the sector currently contributes about 3.98% to the GDP. Is this good enough?
Very bad, because ideally the sector and agriculture combined should be contributing 40% each. So until we're able to claw our way back to that reality, where we have so much to do between our agricultural products and then processing them further before we begin to export if we need to, we will be shortchanging ourselves.
So how can we begin to achieve that? We know that different policies were put in place this year. We had the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan that was launched by the Ministry of Trade and Investment. And aside from that, we had other policies and initiatives that actually came up, all in the bid to fast-track the development of the sector. Did we begin to see any result from those policies before the year ended?
Let me quickly say that these policies are more of strategic issues. Strategic issues, you don't tend to see the impact immediately, you know, because why? You are looking into the future, 5 years, 10 years, and more. So what has informed the decision of the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investments to go into all these strategic issues is that we all lament about the high level of unemployment in our country. But it's not too difficult to find out why we have such unemployment, because when you look around us, most of the things we use are imported. So therefore, we have unconsciously exported the jobs that should have been for us to other people's countries, because those goods are produced somewhere.
Yes.
And where they are produced, therefore, thousands of people are employed in order to be able to produce them. If we are able to eventually domesticate some of this production, or most of it, back into our country, then definitely we are going to witness a much lower level of unemployment.
Well, Mohammed, I noticed that when you were talking about the challenges that most manufacturers faced this year, you didn't mention fund, because we know that access to finance is a big challenge for every sector, not just the manufacturing sector. So did that improve this year?
Access to fund have always been an issue, but if you ask me, it's not a major issue.
It's not a major issue?
No, because the major issue is once you have a bankable project, the banks are more than willing to provide funds for you.
At what interest rate?
That is another question, because the interest rate that is going to be able to drive the economy in the manufacturing area has to be single digit. But while we are at it, and it is not yet uhuru in that direction, I'm still thinking that if we have a system that actually supports manufacturing, that is by having good power and by having as much as possible good tariff structure that supports it, the issue of funding, one way or the other, will take care of itself.
Because your company is, we can't call it a small company. We have companies that are small in this sector as well. They found it very challenging accessing finance for this year. Now, we know that the Central Bank of Nigeria actually intervened in the sector and gave some funds, just like it did for the other sectors, agriculture, aviation, and SMEs generally. Now, these funds were they given at single-digit interest rate? Because already you kind of touched on it, but I'd really like for us to speak more about it, because going into the new year, into 2014, it is very imperative for us to begin to understand how we can drive this sector to achieve what it's supposed to achieve, namely create more jobs and reduce the number of unemployed people that we have on the street, and make us less import dependent.
Yeah. Well, all the funds that were brought in by the CBN for the sector were warehoused at the Bank of Industry. And these funds usually are subsidized. They are not actually given out at the usual 20-something% interest that normally applies. So once the project itself is a project that is viable, that is bankable, the Bank of Industry, as I speak, is even making a lot more effort to even recapitalize more. If you listen the other day, there was a special fund for the cassava bread project. Yeah. I think about 4.8 billion naira or so, which is supposed to be warehoused with the Bank of Industry. So, as long as these projects actually keep coming, the probability is there that people can access them at much lower interest rates.
Now, the federal government, as I already mentioned, came up with various policies to encourage local manufacturers. One of such is the automobile policy. That one was quite an interesting one, because it generated a lot of furore among key players in the sector. Now, you're in that sector. Your company makes tires, and we know that this is an important component of a car. Without tires, a car will not move. Whatever type it is, whether it's a tricycle, whether it's a bicycle, it must have tires. Now, we have this rising tariff on imported cars. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, you cannot make omelets without breaking eggs. This is my belief. So usually any economy that wants to develop into the future, there's usually that period of sacrifice. Other countries that have been able to do it, and notably here I will talk about South Africa, have had to also pay this kind of price. In fact, at a time when South Africa was about to put on its auto policy almost 20 years ago, the interest on imported vehicles was put at 110%. Okay. So, if we say we want to, recreate our auto industry, where we have a very large market, but a lot of it has to be imported because we don't have the industry. If we say we want to create that industry, then we have to start from somewhere.
Now, speaking about creating that industry, very recently, just yesterday, we heard that the federal government's in a bit to encourage patronage of made in Nigeria vehicles and discourage importation, says they're going to make cars here in Nigeria and sell them for about 1.2 million naira. How realistic is this? Because I feel that it's a case of putting the cart before the horse. I mean, in terms of how much the parts and the components that will be used to manufacture the car will cost, isn't it that supposed to determine how much the car will be sold for? Because if you already put a figure of 1.2 million on the car, then there's a possibility that the manufacturer will begin to scrimp on what products or components they are going to use to make the car. For instance, you want to make a car, and then you need tires, rubbers for all that the insulators and the rest of it that are going to be used. And I come to Dunlop to ask for your invoice, and I need to know how much you're going to sell this and what it will go for. And then you give me such a high price. I would definitely not probably buy from you, because I want to make the car affordable for everybody to use. And so there's a tendency that I'll begin to use substandard products. So how realistic is this going to be?
Well, let's start by agreeing that here we're discussing economics. It's not the government that's going to make the car. What the government is saying is it is giving an indication of the kind of bracket where a cheap vehicle is likely to be by that time. A cheap
vehicle that might be made from substandard products?
I don't necessarily share that opinion. Why? Because that's why I say it's a matter of economics. Because in economics, it's a matter of the law of demand and supply, and competition sets in. Every time an issue is being dealt with at the private sector level, what you end up having is competition. And once competition sets in, of course, the consumer usually is the one that laughs last.
Okay.
And of course, you can take the telecoms industry as an example. When it first started, you are buying SIM cards for how much? I can't remember now, but it used to be,
A combination of the SIM card and the phone could go for as much as 35,000 in some cases, 50,000 in some cases.
Okay, how about today?
Well, today you get a SIM card for as less as 100 naira.
And the government has not legislated anything. So it's just sheer competition. It's the law of economics. Once demand and supply are at play, in the fullness of time, is the consumer that laughs last.